Thanks, Antoinette. Yeah, so I guess what I'd probably like to try and move to from this conversation is, it's probably easy to wax lyrical, I guess, about the story, and spend a lot of time reminiscing. But I guess like Fred, after sort of 15 or 16 years from it, you kind of think, what kind of things does the occupation, what kind of things do the occupation promote that you can still continue as kind of lessons for those who are interested in making change? So I guess I want to come to it from that perspective. The thing that I think stood out for Bankstown was, and probably unlike almost all of the other stuff that was happening at the time, rather than protests in a form of resistance to onslaughts and attacks, we actually stopped and took stock of the situation and actually wanted to change the campus and make it better. And I think that's something that is often lost on a lot of the left. A lot of what we're doing is very reactionary. It's very reacting to the next sort of cut, the upfront fee, the introduction of a new course fee, or whatever it might be. And so there was elements of that for us at Bankstown, but there was also this kind of desire amongst a lot of these kind of core activists who wanted to change the world. We want to change things, right? And I think that that's really important. But I think that sometimes what's lacking in analysis of wanting to change stuff is, why can't you just change stuff? Right? And clearly the question then has to come to this issue of power. So how do you get those with power to do something they don't want to do? It was a question that I think was introduced to me at the Bankstown occupation, and something that I continue to ask myself, whether it's workplace activism, whether it's union staff, or whether it's kind of broadly looking at society going, how are we going to do something about this world? So I guess I tried to break that down into 4 points. So I think if you want to get those with power to do something they don't want to do, you've got to do the following things. You've got to have some knowledge. You've got to know your enemy, and you've got to know yourself. You've got to organise your forces well and towards an end. You've got to propel your forces at a weakness. And finally, you've got to create the conditions where it's easier for those with power to give in than to continue fighting you. And I think that in a nutshell is what we kind of were able to achieve at Bankstown. So really briefly, I'll go over those points. So knowing your enemy. Who can give you what you want? I mean, those of us doing stuff around 99 in the next few years, we knew, simply by being around and asking the right questions, we knew a lot about who was running what in the university, who you had to go and create arguments with or have issue with around various things. And we learned that structure in a very active way. We didn't just sort of do it by sitting back and researching online. You go on with a problem and then you chase it up the chain and you keep pushing things. You'd also start to learn who was more amenable or less amenable to various forms of pressure, and we would test them out. So we did have a number of small rallies. Sometimes those rallies would deflate you, sometimes they would encourage you, well prior to the occupation. And so we were constantly testing out our enemy, and we were acquiring this intelligence and understanding. Knowing yourself, what spaces exist for us to organise in? We were blessed with having a students' association that was largely free and open and accessible. That condition doesn't exist today on a campus like Bankstown. So where are the spaces? You need to be creative and think about those spaces. What resources are available to you? I think you need to create spaces if they don't exist. You need to meet. Facebook events are not good enough to organise change. They can be a useful tool, I think, today, but I don't think they're good enough. You've got to go out there and try and fail. You've got to go out and speak to people. I remember the first time I handed out a leaflet, and Fred's probably similar, and everyone else who's done that. It's a bit awkward, a bit embarrassing, a bit difficult, probably still not easy sometimes, right, depending on your context. But you've got to go out and do that. And we did a lot of that, and we got to know a lot of people that way as well. All right, so then organising for an ends. This is perhaps the boring bit, because this is the bit that's never in the movies of those who make change, but you've got a plan. And when I say plan, I don't mean plan the next meeting and what the nibblies are going to be. I mean plan to an end. How are you going to make this happen? How are you going to take people on a journey where there's going to be a result? And how do you envisage that result? Have some audacity and have some bravery in the planning, I think, is really key. Consider contingencies. We didn't just occupy randomly. We had a good think about it. We thought how it might play out, what it might look like, how are we going to get resources there, what if it all goes bad? What if shit goes bad, the police show up and start hauling people off? What are you going to do? Right? The last thing you want to do is having organised something and be a leader and then be totally ill-prepared and have put people in that situation and have no kind of foresight into what might take place. And then the last part of the planning, I think, is to look for weaknesses in your opponent. I think the example at RMIT, they did that, right? I think we did the same thing here at Bankstown. We looked for weaknesses. We knew a big weakness for them was that we were on good terms with security guards on campus who were getting fucked over too. And our demands then incorporated and brought those guys on board. So that was clearly a massive weakness for them that we were able to continue to exploit over a long period of time. You need to find weaknesses. Once I think you've identified your weaknesses, you've got a plan. The third step, I think you've got to propel at that weakness. And so we occupied. Now, as Fred was saying, the occupation itself wasn't the thing that you take out and say that is the strategy. It was the right thing at that time because it created the space for us to continue to build out and develop from. It might be something different here if we were to do something similar today. You have to identify where you'll have an impact. And the final thing you need to do is you need to maintain and escalate. And so what we were doing, as Fred rightly pointed out, I think, was having the daily speak outs. It then became sort of every other day. But we then, pulling on solidarity. If somebody sends you a message of solidarity, follow up. Someone says, what can we do for you? You find something they can do for you. We had CFMEU sending people out to look at construction being done on the campus, right, with the threat of involving work cover and shutting down unsafe workplaces, right? That caught the university totally off guard. I mean, they're ready to negotiate with us, these kind of upstarts who think they're going to be sitting in this building for a little while, and all of a sudden they've got calls saying construction's being shut down on one part of a campus, or we'd send people to other campuses where they were having a meeting and they wouldn't expect us to be there. So you've constantly got to escalate. And we escalated to the point where on the night they signed the agreement, they were signing the agreement because they feared an NUS State Day of Action. Then a few students were going to call a State Day of Action to be held at Bankstown, and that was kind of our last sort of propulsion. Now, whether or not we could have pulled that off, or whether it would be a fizzer, remains to be seen. It's one of those kind of questions for history, but it freaked them out enough that they caved in on that night before and asked us, could we call it off? So I guess the last part is you've got to give these guys a way out. If you got them back to the wall, in the conditions like we were in, and I don't think we were able to, the day after, actually take over the whole university and run the university, as an autonomous, free university in a state institution. So we weren't in that position, so we needed to give these guys a way out. And their way out was agreeing to us, right? As soon as they said, if we agree, can you call off this action? We said, we can call off the action, we can have the place clean by midday, we'll be out, and you won't even know what happened. And by giving them the way out, we actually made it easy for them to give in. And the last thing was, it was fun. The space we created was fun. That space where people are able to engage and involve, it's fun because it's unlike anything else you might experience. But it's fun because in that space, people got to know each other, and we built genuine human relationships that were authentic, and many of them continue to go on. So I think in a nutshell, for those who are interested in making change, and particularly students who are here today, who are looking at their campus, and they know they're having conversations with their classmates and friends about how shit the parking is, or how much money they spend on a rebrand, or look at this or look at that. From those, you need to coalesce something more meaningful. You need to turn those conversations into something, well, let's have a meeting and see who comes. And you know what? It might be 3 or 4 people, but at the start, and you've got to build from there. But it won't happen unless you take that leap. You need to get out there and actually start making that happen. And you need to do so with an analysis of how you're going to make those empower, do something they don't want to do. If you can figure that out, you might succeed. I've got a feeling that for every success, there's probably a lot of failures, and we've all experienced them, those who continue to do activism, but that's part of the process, and you've got to use those to gain your knowledge.